with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Tuesday, March 14th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Alexandra Scaggs, reporter for the Financial Times, on the breaking down the bank failures we've witnessed so far this week, and perhaps counting. Also on the program today, inflation numbers are out, inflation in check, but the Fed may pause only because banks want them to. And if you're in the market, the FDIC plans another Silicon Valley bank auction. I believe it's today. So if you ever wanted a bank cheap, train safety bill released in the Senate. For the first time, EPA will require utility companies to remove forever chemicals from our drinking water. Via the shadow docket, the Supreme Court gets what might be the most consequential transgender case ever. Illinois enacts mandatory paid leave for any reason. And that Texas judge finally makes public the time of the abortion pill hearing he's holding. Trump grand jury in New York in its final phase. The former lawyer Cohen goes to testify. 21 Republican South Carolina lawmakers propose the death penalty for abortion. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It is Tuesday. Newsday, as my co-host Emma Vigeland. Well, I don't know if you coined that. Did you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I did.
Well, you did that one too?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez. Make most of your money off of this gig just on residuals, like
honestly,
on licensing fees.
I've cornered the IP.
I don't know if people use Tuesday Newsday as much as they use Hump Day.
Well, you've gotten it wrong. It's Newsday Tuesday. Sounds a lot better.
I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do any of those.
You don't know how to brand, I guess.
I don't know how to do any of those. Let's get right into it. This, I was speculating yesterday that one of the reasons, and there's multiple aspects of this, and we're going to go through some of this with Alexandra Scaggs in a moment, but there's multiple aspects of what happened. There was the rollback on the Dodd-Frank requirements for a bank this size that took place in 2018. There was the subsequent execution of that essentially rollback by the Fed, which is responsible for regulating banks. There was the bank itself taking risks that weren't caught by regulators because they escaped that threshold. And then there was depositors who were putting a tremendous amount of money in this bank beyond the FDIC limits of insurance without what they call, I guess it's cash sweeps. It's basically an instrument in which, you can hire somebody to distribute your money in a way that it's all federally insured across different banking situations or different accounts. And that didn't happen. And those are the people that we as a society, not necessarily our tax dollars, but I think we're probably splitting hairs here. We are bailing out these depositors, and people can make an argument as to whether or not we should do that at one point. But clearly, they were, for some reason, ignoring the limits to FDIC insurance, what goes up to $250,000. If you have $250,000 in a bank and the bank collapses, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation will make you whole from fees it has pulled from banks. It has essentially a fund. But if you put $260,000 in the bank, that last $10,000 for normal people, you're out of luck. And so people who have that kind of money usually know not to do this. But here we find out, and I speculated on this yesterday, and here Andrew Ross Sorkin, somewhat confirms that that's what was going on in this bank.
Very grateful for the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and FDIC for stepping in.
Pause it. We should just make it clear. This is Hemant Tanja, who is the CEO of General Catalyst. I don't know what any of those things are, but go ahead.
Very grateful for the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and FDIC for stepping in. I think backstopping the deposits has gone a long way.
A lot of times, SVB would offer loans that were unavailable elsewhere. They would offer mortgages personally. I'm not just talking about mortgages for the businesses, but mortgages personally for some of the leaders of these businesses at rates that were much more attractive, in part because they were keeping their business deposits there. In some cases, SVB said that they would give you certain loan rates if you kept all of your money there, as opposed to having even any money elsewhere. Do you think that there should be? Now, I don't know how this is legal. You're going to give me a personal mortgage, like a super favorable personal mortgage, if I keep all my business funds in your bank. That's a kickback. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe it's.
This is widely done, as you say, though, Sam. That's the thing. There's an understanding that this happens regularly with wealthy investors and people putting money into banks. And they're getting favorable. I mean, the point is they're assuming the risk. They're getting some benefit because they're taking this risk. What if this bank goes under? Well, the bank won't go under, but so I continue.
In some cases, SVB said that they would give you certain loan rates if you kept all of your money there, as opposed to having even any money elsewhere. Do you think that there should be rules against that?
Yes.
Look, I think those offerings actually were made it really easy for these companies to do business. It was. I would say I don't think it needs regulation against it. If there was diversification, this really would have been fine. And I look back in hindsight, I think about how is it that, we were so comfortable with just having, a single option for these companies. I think once we move past diversification, this issue should go away from my standpoint.
We know that it made it easier for you guys to do business. That's not what we're talking about right now. Next time. Hey, I mean,
that actually was the problem.
That's the issue, right? You've correctly identified the problem, CEO there. And I hope they enjoy that lack of free market in this instance here, where the government stepped in, saved the free market from itself, saved these depositors. I hope that this causes them to have a complete abandonment of a libertarian free market capitalist ideology, but somehow I doubt it.
I mean, he's basically saying, I think we learned our lesson. You can trust us. We didn't get why that was such a bad idea, and now we get it.
No, we lost money on a big bet. That should be enough of a lesson for us. And
they didn't lose money.
Well, if they are an investor, they might.
They're an investor in the bank, maybe.
Right.
But we're talking about the depositors, and they're not going to learn anything. Now, if these people were not people who had hundreds of thousands of dollars available to put into the bank, what we would hear about for now until eternity is moral hazard. It's a moral hazard to save these people who knowingly knowingly took this big of a risk. And now that may be the case, or maybe it's not. But the point is that people should be aware there are two different standards going on here. And it's in part because Silicon Valley is so keyed into things like social media, honestly, that they could make it seem like if those depositors aren't made whole, then you're only going to have three options as to which gig economy outfit is going to deliver your food.
Hey, this bank bailout is not fair to the banks before it that didn't get bailed out and had to work really hard. Oh, wait, are there any banks that didn't get bailed out
before?
This
may not be fair to depositors in the past who had over $250,000 in the
I understand, but it's just like, look at how the student debt framing is completely not applied to these wealthy people.
All right, we're going to take a break in a moment. When we come back, Alexandra Scaggs, reporter for the Financial Times, will walk us through some of this. In the meantime, a couple of sponsors today. Our first, Henson Shaving. I'm holding one right here in my hand. Now, this is not the one I shave with. The one I shave with is black, but it is the exact same design. And how do I know it's the exact same design? Because Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer. They've made parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover, and they bring that level of precision engineering to your shaving experience. I started using this, I don't know, months and months ago. I'm not shaving that much. I'm just shaving here and here, essentially. Occasionally,
right
down the neck, but more or less that's it. And they're fantastic. And basically, the way I got interested in it too was I didn't want a subscription. I didn't want a bunch of disposables. And it's super cool. I mean, I almost can't wait to shave my beard off, although I don't know if I'm ever going to do that. But it turns out that the discomfort that people have with shaving is not a function of the blade, but how far the blade extends from the rest of the razor, I guess. Razor blades are sort of like diving boards. The longer the board, the more wobble, the more nicks, the more cuts, the more scrapes. By using aerospace grade CNC machines, and you can look up CNC because every time I talk about it, I butcher it apparently. Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches from the holder, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. It means a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. And it also has, which is really helpful, these, I don't know if you can see it, these like grooves here, these ridges, channels, if you will, that allow you to evacuate the hair and shaving cream. So you don't have to bang it on the side of your sink or use your thumb. Henson Shaving wants to be the best razor, not the best razor business. That means you buy it once and you are done. There is no plastic. There is no subscriptions, no proprietary blades, no planned obsolescence. You could give this razor to your kid when you're done with it.
Right.
I mean, don't give it to your kid.
Don't do that.
To your child. I mean, not your kid, to your child. You'll be able to give it.
Hand it down when they're older.
Yeah, to your heirs.
Yeah.
Henson Razor works with dual edge blades to give you that old school straight razor shave with the benefits of new school tech. Please don't give this to your child.
Yeah.
That would not be good. Once you own a Henson Razor, it is about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. That's correct. $3 to $5. They are giving my audience, however, a 2-year supply of blades for free. Just go to hensonshaving.com/majority. That's HENSON shaving.com/majority. Add a razor, then go back in, add 100 pack of blades to your cart, then enter the code majority. You will get the blades for free. The link is in the description. I got 100 blades. I don't think I'm going to use them for my entire life if I keep my beard. My entire life.
It's
I'm old,
value.
but I'm not that old.
Yeah.
Check it out. We'll put the link in the bio. Also, today's program is sponsored by Z-Biotics. Hugely helpful product. Yeah. Z-Biotics is a genetically engineered probiotic. You drink it before drinking alcohol so you can avoid the rough morning that you inevitably are going to have, and you get back to living your life. So that means if you're working out, that means if you have planned to read that day or do a podcast that day. It was invented because apparently the real problem with drinking is not dehydration. It is a toxic byproduct of alcohol, and Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic is the only product that breaks that down. All you gotta do, you remember, you drink responsibly, as you should always do. Doesn't matter though if you're gonna have one or multiple drinks. Try and get plenty of rest. Next morning, you're gonna wake up feeling fresh and like no problem. Doesn't matter whether you want tomorrow to be a productive one, a fun one, a relaxing one. You don't have to let a few drinks the night before ruin it. You drink a bottle of this Z-Biotics prebiotic. It's like this size right before you start drinking, and bingo bango, the next morning you feel great. It is when I know that I'm going to indulge, going to a party or something like that. It doesn't happen that often, but particularly on that cruise I took with the Nation Cruise. Fresh as a daisy the next day.
Wow.
Yep. Well, to the extent that I can be fresh as a daisy. You get 15% off your first order of Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic by clicking on the link in the description and using my code majority at checkout. Go to Z-Biotics, the letter Z, BIOTICS.com, zbiotics.com/majority, and get 15% off your first order. Check it out. You will appreciate that. It's a little tip from me. You can find it in our YouTube or our podcast description. All right, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Alexandra Scaggs, reporter for the Financial Times, on all these bank shenanigans. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Alexandra Scaggs. She is a reporter for the Financial Times. Alexandra, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I imagine it's a very busy week for you, and
yes,
it's like your Christmas in some weird way. But
this is when we really earn our paychecks.
Okay, so let's start. I mean, if it seems to me, and tell me, I imagine I don't have the whole story on this at all, but it seems to me there's like four elements I was saying earlier about this. Yeah. There is the rollback of the 2017-2018 Dodd-Frank rollback, which changed the threshold in which regulators would check on banks to make sure they're not, undercapitalized, essentially. There is what regulators actually did with those changes in those laws in terms of the way they executed it. There was SBV and maybe and a couple other banks that were doing stuff they shouldn't have been doing. They were undercapitalized, and they could do that because there was no regulation. And then there was depositors depositing more than the FDIC threshold for what would be insured, which is a really weird thing to do for people who have that much money.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've really covered a lot of it.
Let's start at the top and work our way down, I guess.
Regulation. So There are a couple of interesting things at play there. First is, like you said, the stuff you talked about with regulations being rolled back in 2017, 2018. Basically, again, like it sort of raised the size, or it meant that bigger banks could avoid certain kinds of regulations, right? Like it just slightly less oversight, you could say. And
how many banks are there between that? Like it used to be at a 50 billion threshold, and now it's at a 250 billion threshold. Do you have a sense of, I mean, is there a way to know how many banks are? I mean, surely like okay. So about how many do we have now in that zone?
So I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can say that Silicon Valley Bank was the 16th biggest bank in the United States by assets. Okay. And it stayed under that threshold, which is incredible, right? Like top 20 bank that still is managing to dodge these regulations. And they were like very, very careful about making sure that they stayed under that threshold too. And I think that's something that's coming out now as well.
Wow. That's like when you go and pull $9,999 out of your bank account because you don't want the IRS to know that you're pulling out $10,000 cash.
Yeah. And they talk a lot about off-balance sheet deposits in their recent like 10Ks and stuff. So like they would say things like, oh yeah, well, like we have this like several $100 billion in client funds, but they're like not on our balance sheet. And it's like, okay, why are they not on your balance sheet? Some of it could be, okay, our clients want to invest in money market funds now that the Federal Reserve is raising rates. And I think that's part of the story too.
Can you explain that? Because honestly, I've told you everything I understand about finance. You already know what I know. So what does that mean?
Well, like, you did a good job.
It's off their books. But why, if I wanted to invest in a money market, which is like for a normal person, it just seems like a savings account, gets a little bit higher interest rate. But why would that be off the books? Like, how would that? They just decide to not include that?
Yeah, it is a little confusing, and they don't give a ton of detail on exactly what that money's in. So like some of it is just standard. You like have some extra cash, you want to sweep it into a brokerage so you can invest it, or so it earns a little bit of a higher return than a checking account, which is usually the returns on those are nothing. And but like, you can have a sweep account that sends things into money market funds, and then they have these other off balance sheet deposits that they don't really give a ton of detail on. And again, like looking at the regulatory thresholds, it just seems like it was a little strange to see that like
looks like a dodge.
Oh, we could have this money, maybe. I don't know. Like, but yeah. So with all of that, the Federal Reserve, as you all know, has been raising interest rates for 2 years, really aggressively, more or less. And they also had a pretty big bond portfolio of fixed rate mortgages, which like very safe, guaranteed by the US government. The problem is that when interest rates go up, you experience losses on those bonds just because of like math, right? Like prices go down, yields go up. This is something that happens every time the Fed raises rates, but it's been, a decade since the Fed has actually raised rates in any sort of like aggressive or sustained way. And so no one was expecting their bond portfolio to see losses that were that large.
Okay. And let me just see if I understand this. If I have a bond or a loan essentially at 2%, and I'm making 2% off this loan that I loaned it to Emma.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, other people are making loans for 4% because the interest rates have gone up. The value of my loan goes down. So if I'm going to sell it to somebody or whatnot, I'm losing money because of the opportunity cost. That's what happened. And the reason why they didn't expect this to happen is because they thought that somehow you could go lower than 0% on loans, essentially. I mean,
yeah, more or less. I mean, I think that the sort of view, I guess, in the financial sector in general has been that the Fed can't keep rates high for a long period of time, but that's because we hadn't seen inflation in years and years. And so but the thing is, like, also normally a bank will hedge, right? Like they'll do these sort of complicated things and they'll say, okay, it's because we have this trade on, when interest rates go up, we won't lose an absolute ton of money. But the thing is that, like, that's something that every bank is dealing with, basically. Most banks have these like big portfolios of treasuries, which is, again, is totally fine. Like it's something that is a high quality liquid asset. It's not like the mortgage crisis because the treasury is going to pay back that debt. Like it's not like it's a bad loan necessarily or a bad bond, but
it's not worth zero, which in many cases some of these tranches were during the financial crisis. But it's just not, they're just not making hand over fist. And this is also a culture where a lot of these people are expecting, a lot of the VCs out there are looking for 100x return. So if they're only getting like 10x or 5x, then they convince themselves that they're losing money and everybody freaks out.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to think about like the run aspect of this too. So like you have these losses on the balance sheet. It doesn't really matter until you have to sell the bonds, right? Because you're going to get your principal back. There's not going to be a default. And like, it's, if you mark them all to market, like that's not great. And obviously it's kind of ridiculous that like, they're just not marking things to market in general. But then you don't have to liquidate them unless everyone pulls their money out at the same time. The problem is that we have a bunch of venture capitalists who are like all in the same group chat saying like, oh my God, I think our bank might not be safe. And then everyone yanks out their money. And then all of a sudden you can't fulfill those demands for money without selling those bonds at a loss.
I see.
So like they basically could have avoided that disaster entirely by not starting a run on their own bank.
And to what extent was there also pressure on a bank like this in particular? Because you have a lot of businesses that are essentially their cash flow is bad because they're really just trying to create a valuation so they get bought by somebody else. So they've been taking a lot of loans to pay their operating expenses. That's been their sort of like business plan. And then all of a sudden the loans start getting prohibitively expensive and they got to start. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of layoffs in the tech industry because of this. How much did that also contribute, or just did it create an environment around where everybody was ready to freak out?
I think it definitely created an environment where everyone was ready to freak out. I also think that usually when a bank has a run or like you end up in trouble like that, regulators move in, but the thing they want to do most is sell the bank. They want to find a buyer. But the thing is that if you have a ton of money losing companies and you're like, oh, that's our loan book, how good, people, it's a lot less attractive. Basically, if you have just this one group of people who are now under a lot of financial pressure. So I think that like the conditions were kind of already set up for a run. And then when the run happened, people were like, oh, why would I want to own, like, I don't know,
all these like
Juicero loans,
mythic companies that aren't necessarily profitable yet. They're all just banking on future profitability.
Yes.
So let's move into like, how much did the Fed's actual exercise of regulation allow this to also metastasize?
Yeah, that's a really good question too, because again, I do think that, it's very clear that management of that bank was very aware of the limits that they had to stay under to get regulated more intensely. And when those limits went up, the size of the bank went up. And I think that, again, if regulators are sort of in there all the time, like they can make sure that you're not taking your deposits and then tying them up completely unhedged in things that will like experience pretty severe losses, right? And like some of the the regulation aspect is really interesting because again, like what I've heard about bank regulation, like once you reach a certain point, is that it's just a much more hands-on process. Like regulators are in the office more, they're looking much closer at your books, and you know, the amount of effort that financial institutions put in to avoid like breaching those kind of thresholds or getting included in certain groups, like if you're like a globally systemically important bank, you have a completely different set of regulations, and most financial institutions that aren't them avoid that at all costs and will like really freak out if anyone even breathes the idea that like, oh, could you be systemically important?
Right. All right. So is there any, I mean, from your perspective or from like, just like in general, is there any like perspective now that like we shouldn't go back to at least, I mean, we got to re-lower the threshold, right? I mean, I don't know if a guy has to go to 50 billion or to 75 billion or to 35 billion or what, but this threshold is too high if it created this type of freak out because these laws were intended to avoid this very thing.
Yeah. And again, this was the 16th biggest bank in the United States.
Right.
That was not subject to liquidity regulations. It was not, I mean, so like, it's hard to talk about bank regulation a lot of the time because things are like a liquidity coverage ratio and a supplementary leverage rate. And it basically everyone falls asleep as soon as you start talking about it. But there are like these extra sort of liquidity requirements and high quality asset holding requirements that I think do get applied in, I don't want to say inconsistent ways because everyone knows like the big banks, right? Like the biggest banks, like the JP Morgans, Bank of America's, whatever, they're all subject to these regulations. And the regional banks push really hard to avoid them.
Right. But the liquidity requirements would really hurt their business model, right? Because for Silicon Valley Bank in particular, if they're working with these companies that are cash poor, I mean, there's not. This is probably more endemic to Silicon Valley right now than we might want to admit.
Yeah, I think that the sort of tech deflation, the startup deflation, really has, I mean, let me try to think of the best way to put this again, because, you start talking about like really abstract financial stuff. I mean, a lot of that has to do with interest rates going up also, because when you can start earning a return in cash, then all of a sudden, why do you need to put your money in this highly speculative venture that like maybe will make a ton of money, like selling juice packs or whatever, right? Like Juicera is always the one I think of because I've been doing this for a little while now. But like the general demand, I think, for those kinds of investments is just going down. So like, why would you give your money to a company that's burning a ton of money, even if it just like does the most ridiculous stuff on earth? Because you can actually earn a return in a money market fund. So like deposits are draining out from these smaller banks, kind of broadly actually, but it's just hitting Silicon Valley hardest because A, like they move their money really fast. B, the insurance that you have to get, I guess, on those bank accounts, or that you have to get. Basically, there's so much money concentrated in so few hands in Silicon Valley, or like it's all corporations and stuff. So you do end up having like really big like checking accounts, basically.
But isn't there also, so now we're moving into that FDIC threshold, and this is the last sort of like a tranche that we will talk about, if you will. Aren't there things called like sweeps? You mentioned that, are third-party companies that come in and say, you've got a problem, you've got so much money that you want access to it quickly and easily, but you can't put it all in one bank because then it'll be above the FDIC threshold. My understanding, and we just played a clip from, what was it, Aaron Ross Sorkin? Is that guy's name? From CNBC. Basically raising the fact that people were getting, and I've heard stories of this. I know some people sort of second or third hand who have access to like 0% mortgages because they have $500,000 or $1 million in a bank account. And they're basically saying, I'm willing to risk $750,000 of that if I have $1 million in there because I'm getting a free loan from this bank because they want all this cash. Isn't that what was going on there? And in some instances, the implication was that they're putting their business money in there and getting these personal sort of like it's kickback, right? I mean, that's a kickback.
Yeah.
I mean, so is it your sense that these things should be illegal? Or if they're not illegal, then shouldn't they have to assume the risk? Like, I mean, how do you have it on both ends? If it's not illegal, then why don't you get to assume the risk in this instance?
Right. And that's one of the confusing things about it, because again, a lot of the deposits were like, it's not like, I saw all this stuff on Twitter, God help me, about, oh, well, if it was a farmer's bank, then like no one would be upset that the depositors were made whole. And that just the use of the funding and the sort of concentration of the funding, I think you just don't see in other areas. And again, I think I've also heard that Silicon Valley Bank was pretty aggressive in consolidating, I guess, and like keeping its clients close. So they wanted to be the one-stop shop for everything. So if you want to be the one-stop shop for personal banking, business banking, whoever, just for one group of people, and then you end up being the 20th, less than the 16th biggest bank in the country, like it's just kind of wild to me that no one was like, oh, maybe there's some risk here.
Well, like, they knew that there was risk there. They were just getting benefit. They were just making an assessment, an incorrect one in the final analysis, that the benefit was worth it. I don't know how many, I used to keep tally of how many FDIC bank takeovers that we had in any given year because I was doing this during the last crisis. I don't know. I imagine it's a couple these days, maybe anywhere it can be, I remember when it was like 24, 50, there's a lot.
Yeah.
How many like farmer banks, how many banks do we generally see where there is 90% of the holdings in that bank are above the FDIC threshold? Because I don't think that happens. I mean, if there was farmers making that much money, and they were larding up a bank like that, I don't think I would have any more or less sympathy than I do for anybody else. It's like, but farmers are supposedly, but even farmers, it seems to me, they're much better with their money than these people.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I think it was like 93% or something of the deposits were over the FDIC insurance limit. And, again, like that's $250K. People are saying like, oh, well, companies can't make payroll. But then again, at the same time, exactly.
That exists.
Treasury management.
They must know that. If I know that after a day of this happening, I would imagine they must know this.
There's an entire business around it, and actually I was listening to some VCs talk about it, I think on a podcast or something, but they were saying like, oh yeah, like I was taught when I was coming up to move my money around. It's like, well, okay, why didn't you do that?
Well, because they're getting sweetheart deals. We're thinking. Yeah, I mean, that's got to come out in the next week or so, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, there was and is a lot of talk about how intensely or how sort of aggressively Silicon Valley Bank. Everyone says like, oh, they courted their customers, but they really were like, okay. One example is I think Coinbase had to sell warrants to them in order to get a banking account, because crypto. You can also, there are good questions about whether crypto firms should be able to access the U.S. banking system. But they were saying, okay, we'll give you access to our payments system, but we need a cut. So like, as you were talking about this sort of like kickback thing, like they were saying, okay, we will actually let you use the payment system, but we need a chunk of your equity. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out there.
Well, Alexandra Scaggs, reporter for the Financial Times. I know you've probably got about 14 other things to do right now during your Christmas time. Thanks so much. Exactly. Well, good luck with it. I hope things calm down for you. Really appreciate your helping us out with this.
Thanks so much again for having me. All right. Bye.
All right, folks. Well, let's go through. Kowalski's going crazy, incidentally, on the IM right now.
Oh, of course.
Even my family farm uses 3 different banks. It's a lot safer, says Kowalski from Nebraska. I don't think a farmer has $250,000 cash on hand. I'm pretty sure an operating note does not constitute an asset in the same manner. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, we got to find that tweet that Alexandra was referencing there where someone's talking about the farmers.
Yeah, give me a break.
Well, I'm curious who said that now.
You know, if this was a bank that just serviced teachers and they all had $500,000 in cash in their bank account, yeah, that would be a real problem.
Just farming my surveillance tech over here.
Right.
It really is amazing. And I will say this too. It's like, this is not in any way a knock on Alexandra, but these industries, like, the way that they talk about this stuff, the reporters, the talking heads on TV, they all use a vernacular. And to be fair, like the legal industry does this, all these industries do this as a way of sort of like making things less opaque or more opaque.
Or seem more complicated, sophisticated. There's a way to kind of keep the masses out from understanding.
Indeed. And like, just like this bank was aggressive in courting client. Aggressive? What do you mean aggressive? Like, I'm aggressive.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing stuff that is going to create a significant amount of risk that then I'm going to say, like, we've got so much risk. The U.S. government has to step in and do something to save us.
I guess you could call greed and like towing a legal boundary aggressive.
You can get arrested or charged for taking out $999,000 cash out of your bank account if there is any evidence that you are doing this to avoid scrutiny from the IRS. If you take 10 grand out of your bank account, the IRS and the Treasury, somebody gets notified. That's the way they got Rush Limbaugh on his Oxy problem. That's the way they got Elliot Spitzer on his prostitution problem. And why don't we have that when it comes to something that is so systemic that the U.S. government has to come in, and that we've spent 4 days wondering if the economy is going down the tubes? We also didn't even get to the point where, like, with Alexandra, and maybe we'll speak to someone else. Maybe we'll get somebody also who can sort of like talk to sort of the even broader issues here. But today, as folks, as longtime listeners will know, or viewers, I listen to normie radio in the morning. I listen to some music, and they have AP News at the bottom and the top of the hour. And on the AP News, I heard today an interview with somebody, some financial, talking head or whatever, talking about how the Fed might ease on rates because worries about the stability of the banking industry. Now, understand that that Powell himself has said, we're going out there and we're doing this because we need to kick more people out of work. That's paraphrase, but pretty spot on of a paraphrase.
Yeah.
And I know people know what the dual mandate of the Fed is because we mentioned it on this program, but here's how it was articulated on this interview. The guy says the Fed has a dual mandate. One is to keep inflation in check, create price stability. And then the other mandate is to maintain stability in our financial sector. And that is, in fact, not the dual mandate, that the statutory dual mandate the Fed has. The other is to have the highest rate of employment possible and balance that out with the inflation mandate. But for some reason, all of a sudden, the Fed is thinking about pumping the brakes because of the impact on the banks. But here's what's really so just messed up about this. And frankly, I'm glad whatever slows the rate increases is good in my mind. But, if the banks go under, they'll get their unemployment, right? If a couple of banks go under, they'll get their unemployment. It's just that it's not necessarily in the sector that they want it to be in. And this is what is really serious, just no greater evidence than, the absolute bullcrap that is involved in some of this sort of classical economics and these Larry Summers, Jerome Powell, these exhortations that, inflation is hurting working people. If you were worried about inflation hurting working people, you'd go in and you'd say, you know what? What is the real main cause of this that we can impact? Now, from the Fed's perspective, they only have one tool, but that doesn't mean that they have to use it. Just because the only thing you have is a hammer doesn't mean that when you see a screw, that you should take the hammer to it. Maybe you start saying we need some type of fiscal fix for this, which means, or statutory, which means we're going to have broader rent control, or we're going to have a massive building program for government housing. Because housing is one of the biggest hits that people are taking right now. But you never hear that. You never hear Larry Summers come out and say, really, what we really need to do is build more houses, build more apartments, deal with the zoning issues.
Yeah.
He just says we need to have a couple more million people out of work. And then he looks around and he says, hopefully it won't be at this resort I'm staying at.
Yeah.
I need my pina colada.
His initial reaction to the SVP collapse was that there's so much fog of war surrounding the situation. I mean, it's very nuanced, right? And then months before, he was saying how student debt cancellation would be catastrophic for the country. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I mean, they think of themselves so highly. So much fog of war. What are you in the middle of World War II, dude? This is the greed coming home to roost. There's not much complex about it. And I want to make this part clear is that we can go and talk about more solutions for all of these distinct different problems, right? But the important thing to take away from this moment is they are talking out of both sides of their mouth. When they talk about student loans, like Emma says, and they say creates a moral hazard. And these people knew what they were getting into, and it would be unfair to the people who came before them. Every single one of those things you could say about what's happening with this bailout from the Silicon Valley Bank of the depositors. Now there may be an argument that you need to do this because we need that fourth delivery, that fourth app that allows us to get our food delivered. If you want to make that argument, make that argument. But the point is that the legitimacy and the moral arguments, because there have been there's been people who've had over $250,000 a bank closed by FDC who had to take a haircut on that. And there have been people who were, subjected to regulation. I mean, on and on and on. The moral hazard here, there's no better example of moral hazard. If you were an economics professor and you wanted to teach moral hazard, this would be the perfect example that you would use. Yeah, not just, other teaching, just regular Joe's fiscal responsibility. This would be a way to discipline.
This would be your example. This would be your example.
Well, the venture capitalists who are trying to take as much risk as humanly possible and have these close relationships with these kinds of banks, so they're trying to avoid regulation, as there's just not enough liquidity sloshing around in here. I mean,
that's the bank, but I'm talking about the depositors. The threshold is $250K.
Right.
Here it is, $250K right here. Oh, sorry. $250K. And they had their money was like all through the roof here. And they all knew the threshold was $250K.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And they go in and they say, we're getting all sorts of benefit from this. I'm getting toasters. And by toasters, they're not really getting toasters.
Right.
They're getting 0% mortgages, 1% mortgages, 2% mortgages. If you get a 2% mortgage right now, you are making money because the money that you borrow and not spend, you can go take that and put that in a money market and make 3%, or put it in a CD and make 4% in some instances. You're literally making money off of that. And the bank would give them this in return for the risk associated with having money over the 250 threshold. That was the bet that they were making. And they lost the bet. But the government's going to come in and make sure that they don't lose the bet. That's what people say with moral hazard you're creating. Now, the difference is between student loan forgiveness and this instance is that this is a better case of creating moral hazard, because if I get $10,000 off my student loan, I'm not going to go, you know what? I'm going to take another loan and go to college again. That's not going to happen. But these people, when they get the opportunity to get another 0% mortgage or 1% business loan or whatever it is, they're going to take it. And make no doubt about it, they're going to do it again if they have the opportunity, because they're getting all their money back and they got to put it somewhere. And I guarantee you, I don't know what percentage of that cohort of people, some percentage will go like, oh, I learned my lesson. I'm going to get the sweeps. That was scary. But there'll be another percentage that says, I learned my lesson. We made off like bandits.
Yeah, there'll be a new crop of clients.
Yeah, who's
like,
that?
I want some of that.
Former percentage, probably much smaller. Single digits versus double.
Yep. All right, we're going to take a quick break.
Sorry, one more thing on that. Like this, we need central planning in this country. Like my entire adult life, we've been flooding the zone with like cheap cash, so these idiots can go around and try to make the next Google or whatever the hell, and then doing nothing. And and you look at like China, the high-speed rail they've done, and the amount of we can barely move the ball forward on anything that's actually productive and would actually be a good investment. And it's because we've given it over to, psychos that are just seeking profit.
This is I happen to think that within a very different, that you can have the existence of capitalism in a country. I mean, I think there's an argument that China is at least partially capitalist.
Right, but they have a lot of central planning.
They have a lot of central planning. The endeavors that people pursue in the private sector in this country have their primary function is for profit. Almost statute, they have a fiduciary responsibility in some instances, have it only for profit. I mean, this came up during Katrina. We privatized parts of FEMA. There were buses that were waiting an hour or two from New Orleans. And a contractor had subcontracted out the buses. And because profit was the number one motive for all of these people, those buses stayed there because they didn't want to deploy those buses and find out we don't need them. But by the time that they knew they needed them, it was too late. And that's why you don't get high-speed rail in this country. That's why you get a tax on the post office.
Right. You
don't get public transportation in this country. Yeah. You don't get a high-speed internet in every home, fiber in every home. The reason why you don't get that is because it's not profitable for the private industry to do so. And on top of that, we'll go further. You don't get the level of safety that you could with freight rail. You don't get the level of consistency and safety that you do with our grid. Like, you don't have, you have people dying in Texas. You'll have people dying, in the snowstorms. Power will go out. Worcester will probably lose power for a week. You don't get these things because it's not profitable. And we as a society decide, like, okay, well, if it's not profitable, then we shouldn't have them. There's another decision to be made. There's another choice. The other choice is, no, we as a society want this. We want high-speed rail. We want better public transportation. We want a grid that we can rely on. We want people not to die because it's too hot or too cold and we don't have the grid to deal with it. I mean, putting aside for a moment climate change. And then you can go further. Like, we want more public transportation because we want to save the planet. We want more, better energy because we want to save the planet. I mean, you go on and on with these things. We want high-speed internet because it's going to allow people more freedom and as to where they live. And we could choose that as a society. But this is also just a reminder, the same society that said, we cut child poverty by 35, 40%, 45%. That was fun.
It works.
Well, let's stop.
We're going
to stop now.
You know what, like, in the macro drives the inflation of prices is the fact that we've privatized essentially everything. So the markets control all sectors of society, including housing, since the Fair Cloth Amendment has prevented federal investment in public housing for the past few decades, and just go down the list. When you privatize everything and you leave it to the markets, there's no element of price control to ensure that there's affordable access to these human needs that should be provided by the state.
Yep. All right, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. We will take your phone calls. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you not only help this show survive and thrive, but you also get the free half free of commercials and the fun half. And you can IM us on the free app at majorityapp.com. And you can IM us via that if you are a member. And you will also support our ability to get sweetheart deals from our bank. So that's what we're working on. Everybody going to get a toaster in this office. Do they still do that?
I don't know.
Banks?
Yeah, when
toasters?
I was a kid, you always get like a toaster, or you get like a toaster oven.
Right.
No,
I've got one toaster, and I think I'm good on my toaster quota.
Emma, what's happening on ESPN?
Yesterday, we broke down the first day of free agency. Still, Aaron Rodgers hasn't made a decision, much to Bradley Jets fans' chagrin. But it's, I don't understand what he's doing. We also spoke about the Lamar Jackson contract situation, how there's this complicated three-way power struggle between owners, the union, and like Lamar Jackson himself, although the owners always kind of flex their muscles and win in that instance. And then Will from Indiana, our college basketball correspondent, called in to give us a March Madness preview, a youtube.com/ESPN show.
Tonight on Left Reckoning, Dave and I will be talking about this Silicon Valley stuff, bank stuff, and also talking to Dwayne Monroe about AI and, the sort of, bubble of it as well. He calls it algorithms and stuff like that. But that'll be tonight, and I'll also be getting in the postgame, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, into Steven Crowder sitting down with Russell Brand.
646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. We'll put up a member QR code if you want to become a member.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back.
Boy is back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back, and the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
We bring back DJ Denner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Going to hit the call button. 646-257-3920 is the number. 646-257-3920 is the number. We will take your phone calls. Soliver Twist. Sam, when your son inevitably picks the bathroom door lock during the 20-minute dad time, do you think you'll be more proud or upset? I answered this already.
You made this joke yesterday.
Yeah. Proud.
Are you sure those IMs are from today?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. No, I'm seeing it too, so must be.
Yep.
You just tried the joke twice, huh?
Whoever they wanted to do it. Hugo's Burgers.